Hi, dear friends. Some words of Torah for Parshat Vayera. When Hashem informed Avraham that he was going to bring great retribution upon the people of Sodom, Avraham understood that this was his cue to argue on their behalf. When thinking about the people of Sodom, however, how could God expect Avraham to defend the people who were so diametrically opposed to his values? Avraham represented the attribute of chesed, of giving kindness to others, and had spent his life trying to share the material gifts of his tent as well as his ideas with the rest of mankind. The people of Sodom, by contrast, valued the ideal of keeping things to oneself and not sharing with others. The Mishnah states that when a person has the attitude of shali shali v'shalach shalach, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, this is the sodomite value. As the Midrashim relate, the people of Sodom were opposed to the concept of charity and of inviting guests into one's home. They actively punished anyone whose heart was stirred with a compassionate gesture toward the poor, which is why the Sodomites were so incensed when Lot invited his guests, the three angels, into his home. Avraham's value was that of the Chassid in the Mishnah. Shali shalach v'shalach shalach. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. Why then did Hashem expect Avraham to defend Sodom? Rav Yaakov Leib suggests that although Avraham spent his life giving of himself to others, he also understood that at a certain time and place, it would be appropriate for every human being to stand on their own 2 feet and not be on the dole. The people of Sodom represented a value that, in certain situations, could actually be considered virtuous. Consider the parent whose adult child still lives in the basement and is capable of living on their own and being financially independent. At some point, they need to encourage him or her to move on and be more independent, not because they are cruel, but because they know that at some point we do a disservice to others by making life too easy for them. Avraham believed that his era needed the kindness that a parent shows to a young child who cannot yet take care of themselves, because it was a period in history when man was still immature and discovering his world. God testified about his own creation, Ki amarti olam chesed yibaneh. I created this world with chesed, with kindness. That is, there was nothing that God's creations did to deserve to be created. Our very existence is based on the kindness of someone who has confidence in another's future and invests in that person with the hopes that they will make something of themselves, like Eliza Doolittle in George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion. Recognizing God's benevolence, Avraham sought to emulate this kindness in a generation that was still relatively close to that incipient period of creation. What was important for Avraham to also appreciate, however, was that there would come a time in man's societal evolution where chesed could actually be counterproductive to man's growth. The older and wiser that society becomes, the more mankind develops the capacity for self-sufficiency, and the more that it is important for people to withdraw from the public sphere and allow others the ability to become independent without relying on chesed. We can see some of the manifestations of chesed run awry in our own society. In an effort to eliminate poverty and suffering, liberal democracies have created social systems that ensure welfare and free access to medical care and other basic amenities. At the same time, this has resulted in the undesired side effect of a certain percentage of the population losing its drive for self-sufficiency and ambition. Society has provided the option for people to live out the bulk of their lives as drug addicts and vagrants because the welfare safety net provides them the financial cushion to do so. This is not to say that welfare is a bad thing, just that for a minority of people, it results in more harm than good. In the Messianic age, the Talmud teaches that we will no longer accept converts. Implicit in this statement is that there will come a period in human history where man will no longer be afforded the chesed of being given something for nothing. At some point in the future, man will reap the fruits of his own efforts, each according to his own degree. Indeed, this was the difference in attitude between Avraham and his son Yitzchak, who represented not chesed but gevura, literally might, a certain effort to help mankind arrive at self-sufficiency. This is not to say that Yitzchak was an unkind man, but rather that his compassion for human beings impelled him to help others help themselves. Instead of sharing his own greatness with others, he withdrew from others in order to give them the opportunity to grow and develop on their own power. When Avraham was praying to God to save the people of Sodom, he was asking Hashem to consider that perhaps a certain percentage of the people were motivated by a virtuous attitude of trying to help others arrive at self-sufficiency. Perhaps there are 50 righteous people, reasoned Avraham, who refuse to give charity because they wish to foster within others a proper work ethic and bring others to independence. It was only when Hashem explained that the Sodomites were not motivated by anything virtuous that Avraham relented. Every social movement, no matter how antithetical to the Torah, has a kernel of virtue. As Rav Kook wrote, one must realize that every evil ideology contains a kernel of goodness which attracts people to it. Accordingly, so long as one only focuses on the evil of the opposing ideology, those who see its goodness will not accept the arguments to the contrary. It is only when one acknowledges the good kernel that inheres within an evil ideology, concedes the attraction to the ideology because of the small amount of goodness within it, and argues for the preservation of that small amount of good, will he succeed in convincing the adherents to come to the other side and rehabilitate themselves. The leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement have been exposed as frauds. The collected donations that were used for personal gain, and little social change has resulted from the efforts of those leaders to benefit the black community. Furthermore, the BLM philosophy of identity politics and the professed Marxist ideology of critical race theory have been exposed as truly dangerous for all of society. At the same time, it would be a mistake to only dwell on the flaws of the movement and not acknowledge the truly virtuous aspects of the stated goals of putting an end to systemic racism and discrimination against people of color. We can imagine Avraham asking, yes, many of the BLM leaders were corrupt, but surely there are 50, 40, 30 people who were motivated by a true desire to see persecuted members of society find redemption. When taking into account the constantly shifting sands of our society, we do well to hold them up to the light of the Torah and try our best to be discriminating in our embrace of new ideologies that may run counter to the values of our heritage. At the same time, we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Our tradition teaches us that each generation is coming closer to the ultimate perfection of the Messianic age. Even corrupt social movements may contain the kernel of that necessary ingredient that moves the marker forward towards man's perfection. And we look forward to that day when our society arrives at an ideology that is truly consistent with our Torah, purified of the chaff of an imperfect world. May we see it, dear friends, bimheira, bi'amenu, amen. And here's wishing you a beautiful Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom.